Welcome to the AZ Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Hamid Shojai. Let's go. And we're live. I'm here with Jenny Poon, co-founder of CAHOOTS. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Of course. How have you been?
I've been good as I can be, like most people in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, COVID has been really difficult, especially difficult for businesses like yours. Let's actually start there. Why don't you start telling us a little bit about CAHOOTS, what CAHOOTS does, and then we'll jump into COVID and how it affected CAHOOTS.
Yeah. So I founded a space called CAHOOTS. It's a co-working space. We started it 10 years ago. I started it after I left the Arizona Republic. I was the art director there for a publication called AZ Magazine and a couple others. But they shut down all of their publications, and I was kind of left with nothing.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, what do I do next? And I've always been told, my parents are entrepreneurs. They started a small restaurant just before I was born. So I've always grown up in a restaurant, and I was always told not to become an entrepreneur, that it was the hardest thing that anyone could ever do. And I was told, go to school, get a job, get a good paying job, and then live the rest of your life with stability, right?
You were told that by your parents?
Yeah.
Who were entrepreneurs themselves?
Who were entrepreneurs. Because entrepreneurship then was not this glorified thing that we see a lot now. And I think they're a different kind of entrepreneur too, right? Like they're very service-based. It's a restaurant and never took a day off. And that kind of life was very, very hard, and they didn't want that for their children. And so I did that. I went to school, was the first generation in my family alongside my brother to graduate college, and then went and got a job and was fine with that for a while until I lost my job. And I was looking around in the middle of the last recession thinking, okay, what do I do now? Do I go look for another job? Or do I start something? And I felt like I had enough skills to start something. So I started a marketing agency. I was working from home. And very quickly I realized I needed smarter people around me, advisors, a network of people. And I was very fortunate to know how to run a business because I grew up in business, right? Like going to my parents' restaurant every day after school. I knew how to do profit loss statements pretty quickly. I was often their translator. And so just knowing how to do those things were really, really helpful, but also knowing that I didn't know everything. I didn't know how to really grow this kind of company. And so I went out looking for other people who were experts in other areas or that were struggling with the same things that I was struggling with.
What year is this? Like what year did you?
2009.
That's when you lost your job and basically started a marketing company.
2009. And I was working from home, and I was getting really busy. So everything was going well. I was becoming really, really busy. I hired on a couple interns and was on the verge of hiring my first employee. And that's when I realized, well, I can't do this out of my house. And it was getting kind of odd having all these interns come to my house in the middle of the day. And so I was looking for space, and at the same time I was looking for people, right? I didn't want to be the smartest person in the room, and I was around all these interns that I was having to lead. I had to learn how to be a manager. I was never a manager before. And so I started going to coffee shops and trying to talk to random people, which wasn't always received well, and met a couple other people who happened to be...
What do you mean it wasn't always received well?
Like some people go to coffee shops to work and be alone and not have anybody bother them. And then there's some people like me, and I'm not naturally an extrovert, but I needed to learn from other people. And so I would kind of peer over people's shoulders and be like, what are you working on?
That's awesome.
And some people would just turn away and be like, this is weird. And other people would flourish in that too. And we would bond. And I didn't continue meeting people at coffee shops, but every time I met a few people that I thought were people I wanted to continue to work around, not like necessarily work with, but just stay connected to and build like a network of people who were going through the same thing at the same stages. And and have different experiences, I wanted to stay in contact with them. So we would exchange information. And I just got to thinking, like, what if I could have this all the time? You know, like my background is in design and marketing and communication. I was a former journalist and infographics designer and then art director, and have always been in this team environment. And very creative environment. Think of like labs in school and things like that. And always putting work up on a wall and getting critiqued and needing that kind of feedback. And I just said, what if I could have that all the time? What if I could be in a room where I could just turn over and be like, what do you think about this? You know? And
even from people who don't work for you.
Yeah,
right?
even
like
for people that don't work for me.
Yeah.
That's the important piece. And getting honest feedback. That's what I had, you know, growing up in or going to school in college and having that lab energy to it. And so I was looking for that, and also at the same time growing my marketing agency, and went out to look for space and found these beautiful spaces, but they were just much too big for the 3 people I was going to house. And so I started thinking, oh, what if I could share this, right? It would kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I could have people around me that are also building companies, and then I could learn from them, and I could have this like affordable space, right? And so that's how, and co-working didn't exist at that time. And so that's how that kind of came about. I went around very lucky at that time. There was a lot of open, empty spaces in downtown Phoenix, and worked out this deal. Like, I didn't get a loan or anything, but just negotiated with a landlord that had an empty space and that had been empty for a while, and worked out essentially a revenue share model with him. That didn't actually turn out well, but
Why?
3 months in, he decided that what we were doing wasn't a viable business model, and said he didn't want to continue doing this kind of business model or this kind of agreement. Basically said, either start paying me like a standard lease rate or get out.
Right.
And so at that point, we had, I think, 6 businesses. And he was also getting frustrated that it wasn't growing fast enough. And so I talked to the 6 businesses and said, do you want to come in and sign a lease with me? We only need 3 more businesses to break even. And everybody said yes. And I signed the lease with a commitment with all of those, right? Like, I wouldn't have signed it if I felt like it was too risky. And we quickly, like, for some reason, after we signed that lease, I think everybody told all their friends and helped bring this community together. So within a month, there were 24 businesses in that space. That led to some anger from the landlord, who then suddenly had regret and FOMO.
I could have made more money if I had just been more patient.
Exactly. And then he tried to like change the lease deal, and eventually we had to move because he was just getting frustrated that he wasn't a part of that deal anymore. Plus, we were hitting our capacity in that space. And I mean, if anybody had been to that space early on, if we were to open that space today, there's no way we would be a business. We were next to a CrossFit gym. So every 15 minutes, there would be these huge weights that would be dropped on the ground, and the whole ground would rumble. You'd hear grunting. It smells like socks. There were no walls. You could hear every conversation from inside that building within our space to the gym next door, and all of the things that they were saying. And so
where was this location?
Downtown Phoenix. It was, if you're familiar with Phoenix, it's 7th Street and Garfield, like right in the Roosevelt Arts District. But it was pretty empty downtown then.
Right.
And so
because it was right after the crash, the real estate crash, essentially, right?
Real estate crash. Almost majority of the businesses like closed. But when things like that happen, there's a huge surge of entrepreneurship, because when you lose your job, what do? You do what I did, right? You start a business. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's how it started. And then it just continued to grow. So every 2 years we would grow out of our space, and we would hit our capacity in that space, and I would go find another space that was a little bit bigger. And then we would hit that capacity pretty quickly. Then we'd keep going. Finally, in 2006, we found a building that was 3 times the size. or 2016. Yeah. We found a building that was 3 times the size of what like our past building was, and said, okay, this is big enough for us to grow into. Like, I don't think we'll have to move for at least 6 years, right? And we found that building, and that owner said they only wanted to sell the building, and that was kind of shocking because it's not coming from an immigrant family, and culturally we were just kind of, there was this mindset growing up that if you own a building, you must be like really filthy rich, right? Like there's no way a normal person can own a building. And that was always just ingrained in me. And so when this owner said, you have to purchase this building if you want it, I was like, oh, okay, well, game over. That's not going to happen. I don't have that much money. And fortunately, somebody in our space said, oh, you need to talk to this person. And they do bank loans and help you purchase buildings. And again, I was like, this isn't going to happen. But I sat down, and they were very good about explaining to me how that process works. And, you know, it's just that block in your head. You grow up and you think these things and you assume these things and you don't dig into them.
Yeah.
And he just basically broke down what we all know is the difference between leasing, renting, and buying, right?
Who did this for you?
His name is Chris Bain from CDC Loans. They work specifically with like SBA loans. So for with people who want to purchase a building the first time for a business, right? Yeah. And so that was really, really helpful. Broke down our numbers and really made it clear that like this would be a really good business decision for you. You have a viable business model. There's a big focus on supporting women and underrepresented entrepreneurs and building ownership and things like that from the SBA's perspective. So we made it really clear how we could do it. It still was a stretch for us to just think through all of that. And as you know, the management of a physical building is a whole nother thing, all the contractors and things like that. But we navigated through it. We actually had some hurdles, but ran a little crowdfund campaign that helped us really push through. And now we are building owners, which is incredible because now we're a part of that fabric of that community. And when you own property, you have rights to say what happens in that neighborhood. And I think that was really, really important to us as we were thinking about the future and our investment, not just in our business, but in our community. So yeah, and then that's where we are now. And last year through the pandemic, we then launched this product.
the HUUB product. We'll come back to HUUB. There was so much there that I want to unpack. I want to rewind for a minute because one of the things you sort of touched on was your immigrant parents who had a business, were entrepreneurs, but were sort of thinking, you know, in order to make a better life for you or for their kids, they wanted their kids not to be entrepreneurs. They had to be entrepreneurs for survival, essentially, right? Like they came to the U.S., they probably couldn't get jobs. And this is something that a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of people are forced into entrepreneurship. They didn't necessarily choose it, right? Mm-hmm. What was growing up as the kid of an immigrants like for you? I mean, were you born here, by the way? Or?
I was born here. I was born in Minnesota.
Okay.
It was, I mean, I don't know. Now as an adult, I can see how very different it was. There was a lot of code switching, right? When I'm with my family, there was different languages spoken. I lived with my grandma as well, who only spoke Chinese. My parents are Chinese Vietnamese, so we're Chinese ethnically. They were born in Vietnam and then immigrated as refugees to the U.S. during the Vietnam War. And so we are ethnically Chinese, but have Vietnamese like cultural background. And so growing up in Minnesota, there was a lot of like, I think I grew up thinking I was white. Like I went to school with all white kids and all my friends were incredible, but they were all blonde and white. And I feel like the only time I really realized I was Asian was when I would come home, switch, you know, speak a different language, or when I would have to go to Chinese school on the weekend, or if we ever did anything with our family. So like at school, I just felt like I was white, and I'm grateful that I didn't feel like I was an outsider. The only time I really knew that I was different was coming home and bringing friends over. And there was a sudden questions of like, what did your grandma just say? What's that smell? Why does it smell like rice? Why are we taking off our shoes? You know, like those kinds of things. But it was, I'm grateful that it was always done out of curiosity and not out of
because it's kids.
Judgment.
I mean, they're just, you know, they want to.
And they were intrigued, right? And
it was something different for them.
Yeah.
Right?
And so there was almost this level of, I think, as children, we always want to blend in. And so I didn't feel like I was an outsider. I think thinking back, I could have probably perceived it that way, but I don't think I did growing up. And some nuances of that, though, is in business, I think what has led to the work that I do now is I could see very clearly the discrepancy between the resources that my parents had and other people had, right? So we had this little house that we all lived in. I shared a room with my brother and my sister all the way through high school, which I don't regret. Like, we fought and it was crazy, but it made us like closer. But going into work with them every day after school, like taking naps in these extra rooms in our restaurants that we had that were like storage rooms, and having to help translate like some of the things that they had trouble with. I think that was very different. But it also equipped me now to see like, oh, these are actual challenges that people continue to have in business, right? Like the fact that you can't just randomly call expert CPA because you don't know an expert CPA is a problem,
right?
You know, and that's why they continue to have these struggles with organizing their books. Even to this day, 40 years later, when I was trying to help them with their PPP loans, it's a mess, right? Like they've never had somebody to lean on that could help them do that kind of stuff. And I think this last year has really opened up these opportunities, but also the visibility of how behind resources are for some communities. And it's not that they don't exist. It's just, it's hard for them to access, right? Like when you don't know the language, my parents don't have a computer. They operate solely off of a tablet and a phone. You know, and right. I think we've talked about this. I think you have similar, I think generationally too, like it's an age and it's a cultural thing. Again, another example is I told my dad to apply for this grant in Minneapolis for restaurants that were impacted by COVID. And it was a $15,000 grant by the county. He applied. A week later, he sends me an email and he said, oh, I got this email, but I think it's fraud. I don't think I should do this. It was an email confirming that he got the money. And he's like, what's DocuSign? He's like, why would they want my bank account information? I'm just going to trash this. I'm like, no.
This is how you get the money into your account.
And so I had to sit down and explain to him, like, you have to give them your bank account because that's how they're going to give it to you. And DocuSign, don't worry, it's a trusted thing. Right. It's fine. But those are the simple things that we've neglected through the years to like help them keep up. And a part of it is,
you know, you just gave scammers a bunch of ideas.
Sorry,
they're like, I need to use DocuSign to get, you know, rather than phishing emails, it should be DocuSign emails.
No, just kidding. But that continues to be the issue. They applied for the PPP loan, same thing. And they were like, do we have to pay this money up front? And just navigating government systems has always been tricky. Government is not the best at communication. And there's history of mistrust there. Like if you think about their background, right? They were refugees from Vietnam, which meant my dad's story is their family had one of the like most profitable tea companies in Vietnam, but they lost it all in the war. And so the government took everything from them. That's their experience with government. And so when you come here and your little interactions that you have with government is around permitting and health inspections, and it's always about regulation and enforcement, like what do you expect the government to do for you in a time like this? Nothing, right? Like it's always been about don't call them because they're only going to cause trouble.
Yeah, you can only get in trouble.
Apologize later is kind of the methodology, but really there's this, like having worked one foot in, one foot out around government in the work that we do, there's a lot of opportunities that come through government in contracts. And I think especially at the local government level, they're trying a lot, but there's resistance because of this history, right? Like this history of of mistrust with this kind of community. So this is what has led to all of this, is growing up in this kind of environment and seeing my parents struggle with those kinds of things, and trying to figure out how to fix it now.
Yeah. What an incredible story. I mean, we could probably talk about that experience a lot longer, but I want to go back to CAHOOTS, and you're growing rapidly. You built or you bought a building in 2016 that was continuing to thrive and grow. Had you hit max capacity yet before 2020 when COVID hit? 2020, January, February, and March were our best months we've ever had. Okay. And then COVID hit.
And we're still okay. We're still doing fine, but it is hard. Like, it's hard running an organization that is really dependent on bringing people physically together, right? And I think all co-working spaces are probably going through that same problem. But I think we're feeling that energy start to come back. We're having a ton of tours now, and it's going to look different for sure. Businesses in general are moving to more of a remote model, but I think the bigger trouble is going to be getting long-term tenants in real estate, but that's not necessarily our model. So I think what's going to pick up is a lot more flex corporate companies and corporations that want to give their employees the opportunity to work flexibly.
Like work from home, but if you want to go into a co-working space.
Exactly. And they're still going to need meeting room spaces. Right. And I think there's still a need for human interaction and connection. I think we're all craving for that right now. Even the most introverted introverts, I think, are like itching right now. So I think that there's a space for this. And I think we also see the challenges of this. What's been interesting is seeing how big corporation co-working has been dealing with some of this. The big chains and how they've dealt with the pandemic has been interesting in that you're seeing some closures, right? People who overbuilt buildings, and then people or organizations who are really just leveraging the real estate aspect of it. And that's never been the core of what we do, and so we've had a lot more loyalty and longevity in the members of our space. It's not to say we weren't affected. We were definitely affected, but I think not to the extremes of others, because a lot of our businesses were like, okay, well, we can't pay the level we were paying, but we'll just freeze, and can we just pay you something so that you also stay afloat,
That's
so
awesome.
That's the kind of thing that...
See, that's where know, like, the good deeds that you've put out, Jenny. And this is, like, one of the things that I admire about you, that, like, you've been working for the community's benefit and entrepreneurs for the past 10 years that I've known you. I mean, it's been pretty incredible, constantly doing events, constantly providing and making yourself available, constantly bringing the community together, doing charity work. And we'll get into some of that as well. But for the last, year and a half, you've been working on a project called HUUB. I want to know a little bit about that. So, and it sounds like you may have accelerated that during COVID. So
so in end of 2019, we've been working on growing CAHOOTS, right? We've been working on growing CAHOOTS for a really long time, multiple spaces, trying to figure out how we scale the support that we give in different communities. But the way we want to grow CAHOOTS and actually being invested in a community, having like voting rights in a community, means building ownership. And that's too long of a process to be able to do. Like, it took us so long to purchase our building, right? Like, just building real estate, all that stuff does not happen fast enough, and I'm an impatient person. And so, and we've been working on our Mesa expansion for a while, and just realized in 2019, can we do this? Can we do this without physical space? Can we grow our support without having to actually purchase a building? Can we actually scale this in this way? And we've been doing educational events for 10 years, almost every week, and they've always been in person. And before COVID...
Wait, talk about what those educational events are. They're specifically geared towards entrepreneurs who are trying to start something. So, like, what do those events teach them?
So it's a variety of different stages, but it's usually like one-off trainings around how do you manage your team, right? Like better management tools, or SEO for your small business, or Facebook Messenger, or chat bots. Like what are things that you can do as a small business to improve your business? So it's a variety of those kinds of things, but they've always been live, in person, and always during a lunch hour. And
Right.
so if you think about those things and you think about access and equitable access to these kinds of things, who has the ability to take an hour out of lunch to come down to our space to attend one of these events? Yes, I believe human interaction is important. Yes, I believe being in person is a big thing. But when we looked across our community and the people that could actually attend, it was people who had the luxury of being able to take an hour off and were close enough to our building to be able to take that hour off, and had a job that allowed them to do that, right? And so thinking about who we're actually trying to serve meant expanding that resource. And so we said, okay, end of 2019, what if we just started streaming? Live streaming are things just broader. And could we buy this equipment to live stream it and share it, work with different cities to stream it across their library systems? Like we already know that they have mutual vision for supporting entrepreneurs. Could we find partners where across our entire state we could stream some of this great information? And it's like common things that we keep getting asked for. And we'd always get, after we run the thing, they'd be like, oh shoot, I wasn't able to get there. Is it going to happen again? And we'll be like, yeah, in 6 months.
Right.
So it was just this disservice. And so we started looking at, how do we do this? We started buying equipment. How do we do a live stream? And we did 2 live streams before COVID hit. And it was with the intention of, at the same time we were building this platform to house it and build a library, right? Like, what if we did it once and we don't have to, it's similar topics each time, we could just replay them, restream them, build a library, right? Like, we've been doing this for 10 years. We know the common questions. And so we started building a tool for that to house this library and bought the equipment to do live streams. And then pandemic hit and realized, okay, this is actually an opportunity, right? Like everybody has to do this stuff digitally. We're ahead of this. And so then everybody did Zoom meetings, right? Like suddenly, I wish I had invested in Zoom at that time, but suddenly everybody was on Zoom. And that actually just accelerated our work. Instead of letting go of staff because we had to close for 2 months, we just redirected everybody to focus on building this thing for us. And it was really for our own community. Like, could we do this for our 300 some members in our community and give this as a resource to them as a benefit for being a part of our community, and then expand it across our like greater state. And we continued working on it. And then in July, the city of Mesa reached out because we were already working on opening a space there. And they said, we have some ideas of how we support small businesses, but could you pitch something for us? Like, how would you do it? And so they had 2 requirements. We want to do a digital library where we help businesses as they navigate through the pandemic. And
you're like, I'm building
yeah. Like, ding, 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 ding.
Right.
And then the second thing was we want to do consulting services. So if a business needs anything, we want to have a list of consultants that we can direct them to, and we'll pay for that consulting support. The reality is those kinds of programs existed long before the pandemic, the consulting support, but they were never really well marketed. And so I knew about some of these programs. We participated in some of these programs before as a consultant to help businesses. The problem was it's government and it's bureaucratic, and
takes longer.
So much administration, paperwork is a mess. Like, we were hand filling out paperwork, and one of the programs that we were a part of, we had to duplicate it or like create 3 copies, bind it, physically deliver it to City Hall, and then they would lose it and like a year later and come back and say, we need it again. Did you actually do this program? We're like, yes, we did. And so like we vowed never to do it again because we essentially lost money on the level of administration and time it took to continue to do something like that, even though the impact was really, really helpful. And so they said they wanted to do those two things. And we said, well, easy. One, we're already building this library. You would just accelerate it with us. And two, we're not going to do it that way for consulting, right?
The way they had suggested before, yeah.
We're not going to do this paperwork, 3 copies, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's going to be super streamlined. Like, I know what you want to report, but we're not going to sit in front of a business owner. And we had reason not to, right? It's COVID. We're not going to sit in front of a business owner. We can do this all virtually. And
it needs to be online.
It needs to be online. Businesses should be able to like see who they're meeting with, and it should be really, really easy to manage. And so we built a system for that. So think of like Calendly, your booking system for all the advisors on our network. We're a co-working space, so we have already this expert network that we're very comfortable with using. Onboarded all these advisors, connected them all to like our internal Calendly like system that very clearly tracks like outcomes along the way, which is what they require as part of their physical form. And then put that all together, and we could better project manage than the way that they were doing it before, and we could real-time manage. So then at any point, the city could come on and say, where are we with this business? And it also then tracks the journey of a business owner, right? Like I think when we as community builders and organizations that help entrepreneurs, oftentimes it's like we help them and then they go off and they do whatever they do and they become a success. We're not the only ones that like touched them and made them a success, right? We like to say that we're the only ones, but no, there's like 15 other people and organizations that
helped along,
right? And we all take credit for it, but it's kind of this tug and pull between different organizations wanting to help, which is such a great like environment for a business owner to be like, look, everybody wants to help me. But at a city level, if they're putting money towards this, they need to be able to show the outcomes, right? And so we're able to track that even after they're gone and done with the program. They're still on this platform and they're responding to other resources that are available, which then can be shared to all these different partners to say like, hey, you did this program with Local First Arizona. They were really successful. They raised their revenues. They hired 3 people. And then they went and did this thing with CAHOOTS. And now they're doing this. And Local First, CAHOOTS, and Easy Cowork, like all came together to help this business. Like, what a great story, right? And that's the energy that we've always been trying to build through our physical spaces. But now this created an opportunity for us to do it at scale, right? So City of Mesa came forward and said, yes, let's do this. How do we do this? And pretty much built it all together and brought, I think there's 350 businesses on that platform. It was a great success. I think we served about 100 businesses in consulting support. Gilbert heard about it and was like, oh, shoot, we need that too.
Yeah.
And so then Gilbert jumped on. We launched that one almost 2 months ago. And then Phoenix was like, oh, us too. And so it's like, awesome. It's becoming this great thing. And we're realizing like, one, government has the ability, like I think about it, they have funds, right? They have funds. Never in our history has government been able to actually give money to for-profit businesses. That's just like a big no-no, unless you're big corporation, Boeing, right? Like Bank of America.
Ironically, the less you need it, the more that, because you can get politicians in.
Exactly. And so that has never been the case. Only this time through the pandemic have we seen this shift, right? Like PPP loans, that has never been a thing. And even being able to give money to sole proprietors. Like sole proprietors have never been seen as business owners. They're not even incorporated as a business owner. Right. But like they can qualify for this kind of thing. And so it's interesting to see, I'd be curious what you think about this ability for local government to sort of seed fund some businesses, right? And there's always been a wall there that said, nope, you can't do that. That's picking winners and losers. But it seems like there's a hole there where local government could actually infuse some of that energy in. And I think where I get really excited is we know that women and people of color have less access to bank loans and are getting funded less. So could this open up like a third opportunity for some of these businesses that might not need huge funding? They just need a little bit kickstart somewhere, you know?
Right. Yeah, I think what's funny is that the argument has always been like, we need a level playing field and you can't pick winners and losers, or you can't like give money to this industry and not that industry. But those arguments are kind of, it seems like they fall flat because we are, as government, helping various different industries, whether it's like, various different monopolies, even, whether it's the electrical company or, there's all kinds of industries that the government is always helping in some way or another. And then it becomes, okay, well, then how do we do it in a fair way that actually maybe you don't pick winners and losers, but you give an opportunity for people who want to get started to thrive, or you provide the support or infrastructure for them to thrive, even if you don't give them necessarily money. So, I mean, those kind of experiments need to exist. And if there's a directional path that government can influence, for example, climate change is something that I think it's worthwhile giving money to businesses who are trying to make a positive impact there, because as humanity needs it, right? So anyway, I'm not against government intervention with giving money, but it does need to be in a smart way, and or in an indiscriminate way. In one of those two things need to happen.
Right.
So you put these things together and you launched it as HUUB, HUUB.
Correct.
And how do you get to it? Like, if you're an entrepreneur and you're like, wait, maybe I can use some of these resources. First of all, do they have to live in those cities in order to utilize the resources?
They do, because it's city funded, and some of it is funded through federal dollars. They have to be a business operating in that city, and it's pretty simple. So if you're in Gilbert, there is a licensing requirement. But you can just go file for a license and access it. Mesa and Phoenix do not have a licensing requirement, but you do have to have a physical address there. It could be your home address.
So if you're thinking about starting a business, could you use HUUB?
Yep.
And
it's
is it
myhub.com.
myhub.com.
myhuub.com.
Okay. That's awesome. Mm-hmm. And like, it's already helping people. How many businesses has it helped so far?
We're probably at 1,000.
That is incredible, right?
Yeah.
And that could never happen if it was just at CAHOOTS, right? Like the physical location.
I mean, we're 10 years in, and I mean, I think we serve probably about 1,000 businesses in and out throughout the year, but they're coming in and out, right?
Right.
We can support them in different ways, but we can't track them after they leave our space. So this allows us to continue to track them and give feedback. But, we launched Phoenix 2 days ago, and there's 100 businesses on there already.
Wow.
So we'll see. It's been a really great collaboration with the different cities, and I think the cities can be a great equalizer for this, right? Like, their intentions are similar to ours in terms of how do we help those that really need the help and prioritize it. And they haven't had a way to do that in the past. That's why we saw things like the PPP loans go out to anybody.
Right.
Right. They didn't think about who were most impacted. Let's just give it to anybody, because they didn't have data to show. How would you track that? How would you know who was actually impacted? Whereas now we're tracking it. We can clearly see which businesses are suffering the most, or who are close to closure, who have been around, who've done community impact things, right? Like, we can see all of that to then prioritize businesses that might need it the most. Like, we don't want to give $10,000 of support to a business that's actually thriving through a pandemic.
Because of the pandemic.
Because of the pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, like, there's businesses that their business has 10x'd as a result of it, and they're also getting PPP loan. And it's like, free money from the government.
This creates this wealth gap that while these smaller ones are surviving, these other ones are thriving, which means it creates this huge unbalance.
Right.
And so while I believe in like fair distribution, I think it's about equitable distribution, right? Some businesses just have bigger barriers, right? Like they've had an emergency medical issue, right? And so they've been out of business for a while, or there's just circumstances that I think we need to be conscious of when we think about how that stuff is distributed. And a lot of times there's just not enough data for them to make that decision and think clearly about it.
It's certainly not an easy thing to do, right? Like, how do you make it fair so that only the people who need it get it?
Yeah.
And the easy thing to do is to just give it to everyone,
Yeah.
despite whether or not they need it. So, that's why you have like some people buying RVs with that money,
Right.
with PPP money. And it's like, the business is thriving anyway. So, and then other people are like, geez, I can barely keep my doors open for 2
Right.
more months. And I probably need more help if I'm going to survive. So that's been it's absolutely interesting thing to sort of see happen as COVID has impacted companies and people so differently. What are your thoughts? Like, what do you think government could do? Like, there's another $2 trillion being spoken about, being given to or being thrown into the marketplace. How do you think they should be going about distributing that?
That's a good question. I think there's some big issues. I don't know how to really solve them yet, but I think the biggest issues with in the realm that I see, right, in entrepreneurship and business, I think some of the bigger issues that need to be solved that are beyond you and me is like healthcare and education. Healthcare, how do we make it so that like we actually cover everybody, right? The insurance system is so heavily dependent on business. And if you want to become an entrepreneur, then you get crappy health insurance and it's
Right.
really expensive. And so that's a huge deterrent. But not only that, our healthcare system is so broken that like a simple accident, a simple random act of whatever could put you into bankruptcy, right? Like
Yeah.
I had a breathing issue at the beginning of last year, and I thought it might have been COVID. I don't know, but I had a breathing issue, and I went to the ER, and I was held there for 24 hours for observation. They gave me oxygen or whatever, and I felt fine after. They said it was like an allergy attack. That bill was $35,000.
Oh my God.
I had insurance. It covered some of it. At the end of it, I think it was $12,000. But like when we know that most Americans don't have $2,000 to like pay for a car.
In savings.
In savings to pay for a car issue that they'd have to go ask somebody to borrow it. That's bankruptcy, right? Like
Right.
medical bankruptcy right there. And then I look at countries like a friend of mine was in Taiwan just visiting, got into a huge bike accident, like scraped up her face, had to have skin grafts from her legs to her face, was in and out of the hospital again and again, surgeries, $100. Like, what?
They have great
They have great healthcare. Yeah, and they cover everybody, right? Like, and so some of those things, when I think about like creating the safety net, entrepreneurship is, I would not be able to do the things that I've done had my parents not worked to like cover my school, right? I came out with zero. I had like $10,000, $15,000 in debt, but not $100,000 like what a lot of kids are coming out with. And I was able to pay that off. I was able to start a business because I knew that I had 3 months savings that I could live off of, right? Those kinds of things. If you don't have those things, I wouldn't recommend becoming an entrepreneur, and that's just getting harder and harder to have, right? Everybody has medical debt. Everybody has school debt. How do you take those risks to do great things when you have so much to have to repay every month and you don't have the savings to be able to do it? So I think about like, how do we create for today? How do we create resources? How do we create opportunities for businesses to create generational wealth? And it doesn't even need to be this like crazy rich idea, but like to get to where my parents got to, right? Like they were able to build a business and pay for their kids' school, and that then creates this wealth that their kids can carry on, right? Like I'm no longer low, moderate poverty.
Even if it's just knowledge wealth, right?
Yeah.
Because like knowledge is something that you can use. Even if you lost everything today, you'd probably feel confident you can sort of restart. And
yeah, I can always find a job, right? I have a college degree. I can, even if I had to work a service job and be a waitress again, I can do that. So there's many kinds of wealth, but some kind of wealth that can be transferred is a big piece of this like trifecta. I think it needs to be healthcare, it needs to be education costs, and then some some mentality around like building generational wealth for people.
So just going back to this COVID thing or COVID bill, I should say, the problems that you're touching on are sort of like
big.
Are big, and they're the kinds that we should be tackling no matter what, even if COVID wasn't happening right now. But the COVID bill that they're talking about passing another $2 trillion of is more sort of immediate. And interestingly, like last time, I think the bill was being kicked around March, April timeframe. I don't remember the exact timeframe. But one of the things that Mark Cuban, I remember, had a great quote that I don't know if it was a great quote, but his quote went something like, we need to sort of like fire first, then aim, because like we need to put the money out into people's hands today, as opposed to sort of trying to figure this out and taking too long in terms of firing.
Because businesses are closing every day.
Right. And that's exactly what happened when the first COVID bill passed. And we did end up distributing it not in the sort of most ideal way, right? Everybody got a lot of businesses got money that they didn't need it because their business were thriving. So, if you were in charge of, how this $2 trillion that they're sort of like talking about aiming and figuring out how to distribute, if you were in charge of that, what would be the guidance that you'd want to provide with the team that's sort of like trying to make the decisions on it?
I think what they did in the second round was right, where you had to prove a 25% loss.
Okay. I
think that made a lot of sense, and I think that would have disqualified a lot of the ones that have profited a lot through the pandemic. I definitely think there needs to be a priority. I think some funds need to be spent on making sure that underrepresented communities like building that trust and reaching them. And it's hard. It's calls. It's sitting down and calling people and sitting down and having face-to-face interaction or going to where they are, right? Like there's not an easy Google ad that you can put out for that will convince them to trust the government in this way. And it's generational too. So like it's talking about culture change, and that takes time and energy. And I think with this money, if they spent some time in that might just be hiring somebody or investing in the communities that know those communities to do this kind of work, not forcing somebody from like federal level to come down and like have these calls. They're never going to relate to Black business owners, right? Like talk to the people that have that community, give them money to do that kind of work, get people signed up with metrics around around signups. So, for example, Mesa did a program, and they did a great job of partnering with a lot of community organizations. They partnered with the Asian Chamber. There's a huge Asian population in Mesa. Partnered with the Asian Chamber, and they sat in the Asian grocery stores and had a translator help people fill out their application, right?
Wow.
That's a level of support.
Mesa is pretty progressive, right?
Yeah.
Like who in Mesa is like making these things happen?
It's their economic development team. I give a lot of credit to Jay and Kelly out there, both fiery women that have been in that space for a while. And I think it's the power of a pandemic too. Like
right. But even pre-pandemic, it seemed like Mesa is doing sort of like, it's doing things that it's a little bit more progressive than, other cities anyway.
Yeah. I think they've actively tried. It's hard. It's still government,
Yeah.
But I think they're trying.
They still have to like work within the system.
Yeah. But the reality is governments have funding, and they just need creative people there. Right. And you can do anything then. If you work with somebody who is actually trying to get creative ideas through and they're for it, they can make it happen. And I didn't think I believed that when I first started working with government, because you would get these hard no's, like, nope, not possible, can't do it because of federal laws or something.
Right.
And it's like, oh, wait, if you push a little harder, they can get creative. They can find money in a different bucket, or they can work with a different organization. It's just really at the government level, are they smart enough to think about those things?
Right.
As a leader, you can make anything happen. You just got to be like, okay, that's a no, but here's 5 steps down. Here's a yes. Like, let's get in through this way.
I think entrepreneurs are like have this mentality of like, I'm going to just do it. One of the things you said earlier, which was, I loved it, which was like, do first, ask for forgiveness later. Like, right? Like, so entrepreneurs are sort of wired to run as opposed to try to get consensus building and, get other people convinced that, yes, this is something we need to do. And I think working with government requires a lot of patience in that way.
Yes.
Which I think not a lot of entrepreneurs have. So I commend you for that. But
have you seen the gray hairs that I've been growing? That's all of them. Like each city gives me 5 more. But it's important and rewarding work because I always just think back to like my parents, and I'm grateful that they continue to have struggles. That opens up my view because I'm no longer I'm not poverty level anymore, right? We grew up probably at that level, but I'm not, so I don't closely know those issues. It's nice to always be connected in that way, and I get to see things from the top down. I get to see things from the bottom up, and then get to work like technology and automation and all this stuff that like I geek out about to try to solve these problems that we've been working on for 10 years plus.
Are your parents still in Minnesota?
Yeah.
Do they still have their, is it Vietnamese restaurant or Chinese restaurant?
Yeah, it's Chinese Vietnamese. I've been trying to get them to retire for many years. I think this might be the year for it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very cool. So let's talk about some of the events that you've had at CAHOOTS that have been your favorite, or some, I know you've had startup weekends, which I've attended, that have been pretty amazing. There's been other community events. What is your sort of like favorite type of event? Is it working with entrepreneurs? Is it creating the products? Go ahead.
That's a tricky one. I hate planning events. I'm really good at it, but I hate doing it. So I don't sit through all of the events that we put together because I'm already so anxious ridden by that time. I do really love, there's 2 signature events that I love that we haven't been able to do over the last couple of years. One of them is our lip sync battle. Totally unrelated, but it's a fundraiser that we bring like CEOs to the table, and they do a lip sync dance and fundraise for underrepresented entrepreneurs. From our youth program to our adult program. It's a fun time because you see these people that you see and you put on a pedestal get really weird and dressed up, and they're avoiding it the whole time, but when they get on stage, like some inner beast I think is released in all of these people, and you just see them in a different light. And
that's awesome.
Entrepreneurship is, a lot of times we have to pretend like we have all our crap together, right? And it's hard to be vulnerable, and so it's cool to see people outside of their normal persona. So I like that one. We bring a lot of people together for that. And then the other one that I've always loved is Youth Startup Weekend, and that was a spinoff from Startup Weekend, the adult program. We brought Startup Weekend to Phoenix early in like 2010, 2012 or something, in partnership with a couple people. And it totally changed my life. Like I went, for people who don't know, Startup Weekend is a 3-day hackathon where they bring together designers, developers, idea people, and they pack together a startup concept and pitch it at the end. And it's super fast-paced, rapid, and everybody who wants to pitch an idea pitches an idea, and then everybody comes together to build it, right? You form teams and you build this idea. And like I said earlier, I'm very impatient. And so this was just this like exciting opportunity to be a part of a lot of different things and see something come together. And before all of the entrepreneurial stuff, right, I was in publishing, and we always had this week of the month called Print Week. And it's like Hell Week because you work a crazy amount of hours and you're putting out magazines. And at that time it was, you had to submit your magazine by a certain time, or else you get big fees to reschedule the printer. And so a deadline was a deadline. Like that was the thing. And I love working on deadlines because there's just this rush. And so Startup Weekend reminded me of that, where there's this rush. You're working against this deadline. By Sunday afternoon, you're going to get in front of people, and you better not look like a fool, right? So you got to get a lot of stuff together. And as a designer, they always had a lot of trouble finding designers. There was always a ton of developers and always a ton of idea people, like business people out of business school. But they always lacked designers. So I was always like one of 5 designers out of 50 teams. And so I always got grouped into 10 teams where most people were only on one team. So I would hop from team to team and like quickly, rapidly build a design for something and then go to the next thing, and just felt like very needed and a part of something big. It honed my design skills too. But I loved that because it reminded me during a time when there was a phase where everybody was like, everybody needs to know how to code, right? Like, and there was this big push on like, you won't be anything unless you know how to code. And having many years in like working with teams, I was like, oh, but that's not it. Like, I will never be a coder. You need a designer. You need like a project manager. Like, you need a functioning team. And so I'd always like rebelled against that idea. Not that like developers were bad, but it's that team aspect that was really important. And so when I was part of Startup Weekend, I was like, this is so great. Like, it's a reminder of how we can work together and how you can produce anything in 3 days to pilot. And it doesn't have to be perfect. It can be ugly.
It's always blown my mind too that like the people can create these amazing things in just a weekend, which is mind blowing. Are there any companies or products that have come about the Startup Weekends that you've been a part of that have actually turned into companies that you happen to remember?
I remember that there was a light rail app that was created. I forget what it was called. I don't know if it turned into a company after. I know it continued on and they were working on it for a while. But it was like an app that told you when the light rail was coming. For some reason that didn't exist, right? Like, we build a light rail, but there's no scheduling notification thing. But it's those kinds of things that have come out of Startup Weekend. I don't think that continued on just because they didn't want to add more features. Like, that was it and it was done. I'm trying to think if there was another one. There was a couple, like I was a part of a team that built what now looks like Peloton, built like a screen where you could be on a treadmill and you would run on a treadmill, but you would be in like outdoor landscape, right? And you could pick different scenery and it would track and measure. And that was like 10 years ago. So I talked to him a lot about that, and he's like, yeah, I should have done that. It's not Peloton, but it was essentially the same thing. And now those things are everywhere, right? Like healthcare or health and wellness equipment. Home health gyms are like the thing now.
That's an example of a business that got huge tailwind from COVID. They like Peloton exploded. Zoom exploded. I mean, like just, and of course, all of those companies qualified for PPP loans, right? Who do you think is doing the coolest things in Arizona? Like entrepreneurs, businesses, any category, essentially.
So I will always plug Dean Heckler. I don't know if you know Dean Heckler from Heckler Design. He's just like very down to earth guy. Super, like not shy, but doesn't like to be in the spotlight. And so very humble, and built his company bootstrapped, and I admire that, and is constantly innovating, right? Like, he started as a furniture designer, now owns essentially the whole tablet stand market, works with these big companies to do this stuff, and then is constantly like building new little gadgets and things for whatever is needed now. I do really like that. And then I've always been impressed with, I don't even know her well, so I secretly just stalk her. Rebecca Clyde, who does Ideas Collide, but then launched the Botco thing. Yeah. Just like, I guess I associate, I guess I just admire her ability as a woman to lead a company and then pivot to something else completely, because those are kind of like patterns that we're seeing too.
Yeah. They just raised a bunch of money as well.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which is fantastic. I mean, I love to see that kind of thing.
Yeah. I always love to follow people who have like continued to shift, because I don't feel like anything is really permanent. We've been just through this journey continuously, and lots of throwing things on the wall to see what sticks. And so I think those two have been really, really great. And then there's more. I love watching people who have become really good leaders. So a woman, her name is Pearl Chang Esau. She was the CEO of Teach for America, Arizona, and then I think it's Equality Now, Arizona. I don't know her work so much as I know her leadership style,
Right.
and it's like completely opposite from mine. Like very peacemaker. Like I was like, I would love to work for you, only to try to learn how you manage people, right? Because
That's
I'm
awesome.
the exact opposite. I think I'm super impatient. And have incredibly high expectations, and she somehow can rally these great people. And I helped her she went freelance. I helped her set up her company, and this was like the beginning of our rapid launch program, which is a program that helps businesses go from like an idea to actually just launch, not tech company, more so like side hustle consultancy. How do you incorporate? How do you put up a website? How do you build your logo? And how do you manage yourself? And she comes to the table, and this is the first day of our kickoff, and I was like, all right, pull out your computer. Let's get working. She's like, oh, I needed a computer? I'm like, oh, no. How are we going to do this? How did you operate before? She's like, oh, I always had an assistant. I was like, oh, my God.
I love it.
So that kind of like, and she's so like calm about it, right? Like I don't feel like she's ever frazzled. And how do you bring people together? I'm sure she's a master delegator, right? How do you do all of that as like a person that constantly is like doing everything, delegation and bringing a team together and leadership. So I've always
What
admired
are
people like
some
that.
of your advice in that regard? Like, what do you think is effective ways of leadership or managing people? And
So that's tricky. I think we're in an interesting phase now where we're fighting against traditional leadership styles. So I'm in a women's group who we constantly talk about this. Like, are we trying to be a male leadership style, or is it okay to like operate the way that we're operating? And I think
what do you mean by that? Like, explain.
yeah. So there's a lot of so things like the way we talk, right? There's when oftentimes, and I'm painting a broad brush, so I don't want to get like hit with a ton of hate mail, but painting
You're
a
gonna be
broad brush.
canceled. Jenny.
Cancel Jenny. It's
You know
okay.
how many people have gotten canceled off of this podcast?
Oh,
You
no.
won't believe it. No, I'm just kidding.
So painting a broad brush, I find just language is very different, right? A lot of women in leadership ask a lot of questions about how you're feeling. Is that okay? Like those kinds of things. Whereas traditionally in male leadership, it's like, this is how it's going to go, right? And I know I have clear view of this picture, and that coalition building and collaboration piece isn't naturally like the default, I guess. And I guess I just noticed that women are more concerned about like how their approach is being perceived, empathy, and thinking along those lines, right? And oh my gosh, I think I'm just falling into exactly what I'm saying. But the conversation around like firing somebody, right? Like, what are the steps to firing? And I think traditional male leadership would be like, just go and fire them, right? Like, understand that they have family and stuff, and let's figure out how to like compensate them, but not as big of a deal, right? Whereas I'm in women's groups, and there's a lot of thinking and talking and absorbing and energy and all of that. And I think we often think that that's bad, but I don't think that either way is bad. I think we're finding a middle ground. Like
Right.
Men are learning that, oh, it's okay to like be vulnerable and be honest and think about how like your team how your team might be impacted. And women are learning to be stronger in their voice, right? And being confident about their decision making, and that might not be the right word. I don't even know if it's not confident. It might be just more so like concern around the impacts, like really thinking through all of how this is going to affect somebody, which isn't a bad thing either, right? So I think there's this middle ground that we're starting to get to, and I hope that more leaders are more empathetic without over course correcting, and being concise and critical and clear about expectations, because I think that's also part of leadership is like you are very clear about where you want to go. You need to be able to rally people around that and get them moving in that direction, and like figure out how to get them to do things like in the same way, right? Like in the same path and moving in the same direction. So yeah, I don't know if that's helpful in that conversation. I think that we were at two very far extremes, and not to over course correct.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I remember early on in my career, I read about a study. I think it was an MIT study that had studied the performance of teams that were just like male only versus female only versus male female combination. And if I remember correctly, that study showed that the combination of male-female teams just outperformed both of the others. And, it goes to that diversity of thinking, right? You have more ideas, more ways of doing things, more collaboration, just thinking through things you wouldn't have thought of, that, if it's just male-dominated or female-dominated for that matter, that could be super helpful. And if the goal is to try to get something done or accomplish a particular task, then you want to have as much diversity in that group as possible.
Yep.
What are you excited about right now?
I'm excited for the vaccines to roll out. I don't think we'll completely shift how we operate because of that, but I'm excited for that. I'm excited. I have a daughter too, a 6-year-old daughter, and I'm excited for her to start going back to school soon and having friends to play with. Pretty simple things. I hope to be able to see my parents soon. They're vaccinated. Their second vaccination will be in the next week.
Nice, that's great.
It's
a huge sense of relief, right?
Yeah, yeah. I hope that people actually go out and do that.
Yeah.
But I'm excited. This last year has been a roller coaster, but I do really love this time period where everything can be remolded and reshaped, and we can really think about how to do this better, which was about the same time when we started CAHOOTS, right? Like the last recession, it felt like new energy.
It's like a reset button every now and then. You kind of need it to be able to reset a bunch of different things.
So I love that because we really can shape it. And now's the time too. We have new leadership in government. Local leadership is having to adopt new ideas. Younger people are moving into these policy-making decisions and local government and leadership. And like all the things we said, new ideas are coming about. So I'm excited about just learning about what's going to happen next and how we can shape it, and hopefully create better businesses, better societies, better solutions to all the problems that we have.
You're certainly doing your part. Anything else you want to talk about?
No, I think we should probably give a shout out to our spouses who let us do this kind of crazy stuff, because I would
put up with us.
Yeah, I would say that I don't think I could do all of these crazy things without Odin, my husband, holding down the fort on all. He's the one doing homeschool with my daughter right now. Amazing. And every day they go into CAHOOTS, and there's a little space set up for her and him to do her schooling. He's still managing CAHOOTS while I manage HUUB, and like making sure, like I think I'm 6 pounds lighter from the pandemic because I always forget to eat when I'm stressed. And so you make sure that we're eating and that we are moving, like
That's awesome.
I don't think that.
Like moving as in getting exercise,
Yeah.
right? Like not physically moving.
Not
buildings.
physically moving, though. Our home values here in Arizona are crazy. But yeah, just making sure that we're alive and kicking and healthy and not going crazy.
You've actually, speaking of our spouses, like Lotta and I were a husband and wife team working at Axosoft. You guys have been a husband and wife team trying to run CAHOOTS, and like how is that? Like, I know my perspective on it, but
it was hard in the beginning. Was it hard for you?
Oh yeah, no, it was super easy.
Oh God. It was very hard in the beginning. We tried to work, so I have 4 businesses. We tried to work together in the first one. I fired him. It was really hard to work together.
has fired me twice so far.
This is not working. And then when I started CAHOOTS, I was like, you want to do this with me? And he's like, nope, I don't want to do that with you. We already went through that the first time. Then years later, he was like, okay, I'm pretty much doing this with you anyways. He was, when we had events, he would come and set up. He would do all of the hard work. And I think what we realized over the last 2 years was, probably over the last 5 years, was how to stay in our lanes. Like we operate very differently. He's from an island, so he operates on island time. Like I always
Where's he from?
He's from Guam.
Okay.
So we always talk about Guam time, and like if we ever go to big busy places, I'll lose him because I'm just like speed walking through the lines,
chilling, talking to someone.
He's the guy in flip flops and shorts and like, yeah, talking to somebody. Probably saw somebody over there that has an Islander T-shirt, is now bonding over a beer or something, and I'm miles away waiting for him at the front of the line. So he's just like and that's why he's so great at what he does at CAHOOTS in like the community building. He's an extrovert. He loves talking to people. He's just a very down to earth like connector. And meanwhile, I'm over here impatient, trying to find whatever tool I can to make this work easier and faster. And so we did hit a lot of barriers. But through that, we've learned love languages, I'm very much an acts of service person. So like anytime he responds to an email for me, if he's CC'd, like dream date right there,
That's awesome.
But yeah, so working together was hard. We've, I think, hit a groove now. We know where our lanes are, and I don't think I could do this without that level of support. I think anybody else would say, you're crazy. Like, why are you still together? Why are you chasing this crazy idea?
Right.
I think a lot of relationships with entrepreneurs hit that wall where it's like really risky and really hard. Everybody's stressed. And like you have to decide if you dig in or you let go. And I think what's great about having good spouses who understand entrepreneurs is like they're a rock, right? Like when we're unstable.
For sure. What's funny is that even the ones that don't work together, right? Because like entrepreneurs are a pain in the ass to be.
We're horrible people.
I mean, like generally they're thinking about how to achieve a particular goal, irrespective of, like how you need to get there and like what the feelings and emotions of other people around them might be. And I think that that's probably the thing that I struggle with the most. And like I'm constantly doing whatever it is that's in my head without necessarily thinking about Laudan. And of course, like, that's when we sort of clash the most, is that, she's been very patient with me. For
Are you listening? Do we get points for this?
I think I might be fired again if she's listening to these things. So she probably is better off not listening to the podcast. Someday I'm going to have her on here, and then she can like tell her story of how difficult it is to.
Yeah, they could both. Odina and Laudan can do it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That's funny. Very cool. It's been a pleasure talking with you and chatting about these things. we got to get together more often.
Yes, please.
Yeah,
Yeah. Thank you for having me.
of course.
This is so fun.
Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this. So such an early spot too. You know, you had
What
no
am I,
idea what to
number 3?
expect. 4, I think.
4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
At least I'm in the top 10.
Well, you know what's funny is that like I'm like, would this person say yes to me if I approached them right now? Like I didn't
Really?
know. I wasn't sure if you were gonna say yes. You know, like
Why?
I don't know.
Does anybody say no? Who says no?
So far,
Call them out right
been,
now.
I've been lucky enough that no one has
Okay.
said no, which is well, actually, you know what? I take that back. One person has said no, but I don't want to put them on this.
I know. I'm kidding. Don't do that.
But yeah, no, it's. It'll be interesting to see where this goes. I think we have some incredibly talented people here, and I think people need to know about them.
Yeah.
And, you know, I consider you one of those people. And by the way, if you think I should have someone on the podcast, send them my way.
Yeah, I'll give you a big list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.